And then I'll unmute mine. Any people? Good morning. We have started the meeting and are starting to admit people. We're scheduled to start here at 11 o'clock, so we'll just spend the next few minutes and probably a few into the start of the 11 o'clock time to let as many folks get here as possible, and then we'll get started. Everyone's microphones and videos should be automatically muted, so we can't see you or hear you, but you should be able to use the chat feature to insert any questions that you may have. Can someone post in the chat that you can hear us okay, or let me know if you're having any issues? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Lots of folks saying they can hear us. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Give them an announcement. Okay. Hi, everyone. We are letting folks into the meeting. We are about 30 or so off from who we're expecting to be here. So we'll give this just a couple of minutes to, since we're right at 11 o'clock, to let some folks pop in. And then we'll get started. Your microphones should automatically be muted and your cameras turned off. So you should just be able to see the cameras for Angel and me. You should have access to the chat. We've already had a few people utilize that to let us know they can hear us okay. So that will be how you will ask any questions or let us know if there's any technical problems. Angel is going to present the majority of the content today, and I will hop in for a couple of topics specifically. So while she's presenting, I just want to let you know that she cannot see anything on the screen other than her PowerPoint. And so I will help monitor the chat and let people into the meeting. We are recording this, so it has already started recording. And when it has produced at the end of this meeting, we'll be able to share out the recording for those who registered and couldn't attend today, or who would like to share the information with their colleagues. We do have some of our other financial aid staff on here, so they can help me monitor the chat as well. And so just want to let you know that's kind of logistically how things are going to work. It looks like we are getting closer to the amount of people that we're expecting to actually sign on versus those who just registered to get the recording. So we'll maybe give it one more minute and then we'll get started. We are also, Angel and I are sitting in the same room, and so we don't echo. We are using the same microphone. So I had a few folks put in the chat that they could hear me okay. When we switch to Angel, if you have any difficulties hearing, certainly please put that in there and we'll make sure that she can get close enough to my microphone to, for y'all to be able to hear her. So. Okay, I think we're in pretty good spot in terms of numbers that are on here. We're just missing a few folks who told us that they would actually be attending. So with that, I will turn it over to Angel to get us started.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. As Michelle stated, I'm Angel McPallister, Michelle Ashcraft is our Senior Associate Commissioner and Chief Operating Officer. For our time together today, we do have the webinar set for an hour and 30 minutes. We may go to that time, we may not exceed to that expected time. However, we wanted to make sure that there was enough time for you all to put your questions in the chat for us to address many of those here today. So a brief overview of what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about the program participation agreements, and we're also going to talk about the AUP reports or the auditing that you all should be doing. We'll provide an update for the non-resident ICERs. We'll talk about updates for new legislation changes to our Workforce Ready Grant program, the National Guard Supplemental Grant, our minority teaching scholarships, our transition to teaching scholarship. We have our CBO programs and or our tuition and fee exemption reimbursement prorated dollars. So we'll talk a little bit about that in detail today. Our Frank O'Bannon grant, and then we'll finish out with talking about claims and refunds reconciliation deadlines, just as some reminders and some updates for you all. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with our program participation agreements. The program participation agreement is the legal document between CHE and your institution, basically binding contract saying that you will abide by the processes in which you have been informed for receiving state financial aid for the students at your institution. The program participation agreements will list all of the programs that your institution or institution type is eligible for dispersing and administering to your students. With changes to new programs and adding new programs, we did have to update the program participation agreement. So those updates will be reflected on that document. We will issue those to you all early this fall, and it should be acknowledged with a signature no later than December 31st of 2025. We need these updated. Many of them are pretty outdated, and there's some programs that are missing. So we need to make sure that the information is there. So getting that signature acknowledged on that form will be really important to have by the end of the year. In addition to that, every institution is required to do an audit and to submit the AUP report to our office. Originally, when this process started a few years back, institutions had the option to decide if they wanted to have their claims audited on an annual or a biannual basis. And it's up to you if you still want to do that annually and or biannually, but we will provide guidance to your institution as it relates to the last time we received an audit from you all and when we will expect the next one. But the status for those will be provided this fall with the program participation agreement. Moving on with the non-resident ICERs, we have communicated the need for this to USDOE. We were told that the functionality in the FAFSA partner portal would be updated for the 25-26 FAFSA cycle. As of today, that functionality is still not working. So we will continue to manually search for those non-resident ICERs, even if you have some resident student ICERs that are missing in ScholarTrack. Please also submit an ICER request for that student in ScholarTrack for the 24-25 academic year. We did notice an issue with some resident ICERs where they were not being processed for whatever reason. So if you have a student that is a resident, Indiana resident, and the ICER isn't in ScholarTrack, but you have it in your system, submit the ICER request for that student as well. Please allow up to 14 days for us to retrieve that ICER and have that uploaded into ScholarTrack. If you do not see the ICER in ScholarTrack after 14 days of submitting your ICER request, just go ahead and send an email to College FA just for the status of that ICER request. In addition to that, if you have a student that is receiving CBO or the National Guard Supplemental Grant that is a non-resident student and their ICER is missing, you can verify their eligibility for those two programs by also emailing College FA. So essentially the process hasn't changed on our end. We just wanted to provide an update to you all that USDOE still hasn't fixed the functionality, so we're still having to manually search for those ICERs. All right, so for our Workforce Ready grant, at the end of the 2025 legislative session, HEA 1515 passed, and it expanded additional guidance for Workforce Ready grant utilization. So any student who has previously earned and or utilized a Workforce Ready grant to earn a certificate, they now have the option to receive the Workforce Ready grant again for a second certificate. Sorry, I can't speak today. So long as the student has not earned an associate degree or higher, right? So if the student has utilized Workforce Ready grant, they earned their certificate, they now have the option to utilize it again for a second certificate. In the event the student is doing like a stackable certificates and they're earning 2 within 1 year under Workforce Ready grant, that's not a problem. The student can then utilize Workforce Ready grant again for a second time. ScholarTrack will automatically show Workforce Ready grant as offered. We have a ticket submitted in ScholarTrack, so that should be available for this fall. There isn't anything that you all would have to initiate with us via email or in ScholarTrack to allow the students to use Workforce Ready grant. We just ask that you continue to follow the same guidelines as if the student has utilized or is utilizing it for the first time, right? So if the student is using the Workforce Ready grant for a second time, the student can start a certificate program. They can switch that certificate program and remain using the Workforce Ready grant as long as it's still within those 2 years, and the credit hours that were initiated, or the credit hours that the student were originally offered under Workforce Ready grant under their first choice or certificate will remain the credit hours available. So let's just do an example. Let's say the student is doing LPN at your institution. It's 46 credit hours to complete. But let's say they change halfway through. They no longer want to be a nurse. They want to do something different. The student can continue using Workforce Ready grant. However, their credit hour usage cannot exceed the 45 hours that was once under LPN, nor can it exceed the 2 years for the Workforce Ready grant utilization. So just look at it as the student receiving Workforce Ready grant for the second time for a new program. The National Guard Supplemental Grant, HEA 1111 passed and expanded some flexibility for the National Guard Supplemental Grant recipients, where it allows students who are NGS recipients and 21st Century Scholar students to utilize both of the awards at the same time. I do want to make sure that I make it clear that if the student is wanting to use both NGSG and 21st, the student must be full-time. There's no exception for using both of these if the student isn't full-time and or following the requirements under the 21st Century Scholars Program. Just as a reminder, for NGSG, there's no credit completion requirement, and the student can be part-time or full-time. So again, just to make it clear, in order to utilize both, student must be full-time. 21st Century Scholars Award should be applied first towards the student's tuition and their mandatory fees, and then the student can utilize up to $5,000 of their NGSG for other items up to cost of attendance for a maximum of 2 years. I want to make sure that I make this clear that utilizing the $5,000 should still be claimed the same way all other awards are claimed, up to 50% of the award for the first claim, and then the remaining balance can then be utilized for the following term, whether that be a spring term and or a summer term. In addition to this, if the student is part-time, if the student is part-time because it is the last term of their degree program, same rules apply. The student should then utilize the 21st Century Scholars Award for their tuition. If they have other fees that are up to cost of attendance, 21st should then pay the remaining balance of those. If they still have other fees that still hasn't exceeded their cost of attendance, then NGSG can be applied for those additional fees. So essentially the same rules will apply for the part-time exception. The student must be in the last semester of their degree program. Otherwise, in order to use both, the student must be full-time. Additionally, again, just to make it clear, part-time students should only be using NGSG. A part-time student should not be using NGSG and 21st. NGSG recipients can also utilize their supplemental grant at approved institutions to pursue apprenticeship or certificate programs. HEA 1111 was the National Guard's agency bill, so we are partnering with them as they're partnering with the Department of Workforce Development to identify which certificate programs and which approved institutions they want to allow their soldiers to utilize the grant at. So as they're reviewing the certificate programs that have been approved across the state, they will then notify us which programs and which institutions they want to allow this grant to be utilized at. Once we receive that guidance, we will update the CHE website with that information, but then we'll also host a training with those institutions so that way they are aware of what claiming looks like in ScholarTrack and or which programs can be utilized under the new change. And then the last thing with the National Guard Supplemental Grant, students can now apply any remaining balance of their National Guard Supplemental Grant from fall or spring to their summer tuition charges. So again, if the student has utilized the National Guard Supplemental Grant for fall, let's say they didn't go for spring, they can then utilize the remaining balance from their approved application, whether that's from fall or spring, for their summer.
There was one question on this topic in the chat. Caitlin has already answered it, but just want to call attention to it. Angel was talking about the process for doing up to 50% of the award for the first term and then the remaining balance for the second term. So a natural split for NGSG would be $2,500 for fall and $2,500 for spring, unless someone doesn't enroll in spring, and then you could use that remaining balance for summer, as she mentioned. But just to clarify, that's what she meant by that 50% split.
We're good?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, perfect. All right, so moving on to our minority teaching scholarship. So William Crawford, so with SEA 28, changed eligibility requirements for new applicants. So any new student that is applying for the William Crawford Minority Teacher Scholarship must currently reside in an underserved county or immediately have resided in that county prior to enrolling in college. Based on code, the underserved counties are defined as Allen County, Lake County, Marion County, St. Joseph, and Vanderburgh County. Reapplying applicants must only identify as Black or Hispanic. So if you have a student that utilized the William Crawford Minority Teacher Scholarship last year, the year before last, or the year before that, they do not have to indicate that they currently reside or previously resided in one of the 5 counties. They must still identify as Black or Hispanic. The application in ScholarTrack has been updated, and it does require students to identify as a new applicant or reapplying applicant. Based on that question on the application, ScholarTrack will then lead the student to either enter in their address on the application or identify based on their race. If you are reviewing these applications at your institution, you want to make sure that you are using the address from the application that the student has submitted. We do know that the address on the application and the address on the FAFSA can be different. So we just want to make sure that the rule of thumb is what is the student's county and our address on that application in ScholarTrack, and using that to determine if the student is eligible or not eligible. Any student, because the application opened up before the end of the legislative session. So any student who has already submitted this application and has identified as Black or Hispanic and is a new applicant but does not reside in one of the 5 counties, their application will be denied by our office. So we're working through those applications now. So if you have students that come, whether it's to the financial aid office or to the education office at your institution, and they have questions about why their application was denied, 9 times out of 10, it's because they are a new applicant and maybe they do not reside within one of the 5 counties. I do want to make it clear with the 5 counties, the student does not have to be Black or Hispanic residing in that county. They just have to reside in that county if they are a new applicant, but a reapplying applicant must only be Black or Hispanic, regardless of which county they live in.
I'm going to pause there for just a second. We have a couple questions, I think, about this, and then I'm going to go back to one about NGSG since we just covered that.
Perfect.
The first question is, will the application that we see to review display race if they are grandfathered? So if they're a reapplying applicant, will it display that information?
Yes.
Yes. And then the second is there a difference in address between app and FAFSA? We don't have to follow up or check, just go with the app address.
Yeah.
Yeah, the process that we're going to use is whatever address is entered on the application for the new applicants will be the address that you will use to meet the requirements of SEA 289.
Yeah.
Any other questions about William Crawford? I haven't seen anything else pop up about that. To go back to NGSG real quick, if you just want to go back to that.
Sure.
First slide there. There was a question in the Q&A section that basically says, now if tuition and fees are met, essentially NGSG can be refunded to cover other elements of cost of attendance. And that is true. We do need everything to apply to tuition and fees first. So that may look differently depending on the institution that an individual is attending. For example, if a student is attending a private institution where tuition and fees may be higher, perhaps all of 21st and the NGSG would go to cover more of that tuition and fee cost. Whereas at a at a public institution where or any other institution where maybe there is a lower tuition fees, the NGSG could be refunded to cover those other elements of cost of attendance.
Yep.
I thought I saw another one pop up, but it went away. Desiree, did you try to type another question in the chat? If so, I think it went away, so you might want to put it back in there. In the meantime, we have another one that says, if a student used NGSG for cost of attendance, will it use 25 units per term, 50 units per academic year, or 50 units per term?
It is using, for that one, it should be 50 units. But the thing is, because it's a dual utilization, if there is a claim for 21st and a claim for NGSG, it's just the 50 units for both of those. So it won't be 100 units for each term. So a total of 200 for 1 year. No, it's almost like if the student was using like Next Gen and 21st, right? It's not going to double deduct their eligibility units. It's just the 50 units for both of those claims for each term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're caught up on questions for now. Keep putting them in the chat. We'll pause as we go and revisit things, and then we'll have time at the end as well.
All good questions. So continuing with the minority student scholarship. So Early Ness Rogers Student Teaching Scholarship for minorities, eligibility change as well for this one. This is a one-time award, so we don't have the same situation with William Crawford, where we're looking at students who are reapplying, who've utilized it in the past. Essentially, for these students, the applicants must reside or immediately resided in an underserved county prior to enrolling in college. Same counties apply: Allen, Lake, Marion, St. Joseph, Vanderbilt, all those 5 counties. The student must currently reside in and or previously reside in before attending college in the county. The application and scholar track will require students to select the county they currently or previously resided in, and the address on the application should be used to determine their eligibility. It's a one-time award, so no provision is needed for any other reapplying students. Again, as you're reviewing these, you will be able to see the student's address and or the county that they have selected on their application, and that is what should be used to determine if the application is approved or denied. In addition to that, it's the same rules for utilizing the funds and or determining the award amounts. That still applies. What we do with that, for those who are unaware, we take the entire appropriation, which is $100,000, and we divide it up amongst the number of approved applicants, and then that is what the student is receiving for the year. This fall, it's not in Scholar Track yet, but this fall, we do plan to put a claiming process in Scholar Track to allow you all to claim the student teaching scholarships. We will provide guidance ahead of time, so that way you all can make the necessary changes to your systems based on the information in the claims file. But we do know that in the past, there's been questions about invoices and how to do all that stuff. So we will provide guidance when Scholar Track is updated. If Scholar Track isn't updated prior to the application window closing and us creating those award amounts, we will move forward with the fall with doing those invoices like we have in the past. But again, we'll provide an update once Scholar Track has been changed. Any questions?
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions about this one yet, but we do have one for William Crawford.
Sure.
It says, if a student is a junior and would never previously have qualified, but they were from one of the approved counties before starting college, can they now apply even though they're not new in the teaching program? So they're not a reapplying student. They would be a new applicant.
Yep, new applicant must currently reside or previously immediately before enrolling in college reside in one of the 5 counties.
Yeah, so they could apply as a new student and they would just be under the new regulation.
Yeah.
I think we're good on questions for now.
Okay. All right, transition to teaching scholarship. So the application for T2T will be in ScholarTrack if that isn't complete already. CHE oversees the application review and the selection process. We have a policy team that does that. So there isn't anything on your end that you all would need to be trained on as it relates to the application being in ScholarTrack. Claims for T2T can be entered in ScholarTrack starting late this fall. So you will be able to do that process. It will be a little bit different than the claims file that you all are used to now. But a training webinar will be hosted by Ty Casimir later this summer. And so she'll walk you all through that process. It's a brand new process. So like I said, it will look different, but we do think that it will be easy for you all to generate those claims for the students that are utilizing the T2T scholarship. So a separate training will be held for this scholarship specifically. But again, there isn't anything that you all would need to do right now for your systems to be able to claim, because all of it will take place directly in ScholarTrack. In addition to that, the standalone T2T grant agreements will be discontinued moving forward because we're going to add the Transition to Teacher Scholarship to the program participation agreement. So you won't have to re-sign those grant agreements if you're adding additional students to T2T, or if we're adding additional students to T2T at your institution. You won't have to continue to sign new grant agreements to process funds for that scholarship.
Okay, we are going to switch to talking about the CVO programs. These are the tuition and fee exemption programs that there's a variety of them that fall under the CVO umbrella. Just before we start going through some of the information that's here on the slide, in case we have new folks who are on here, or to refresh everyone about what has been occurring with CVO. In fiscal year 24, we had, for the first time, demand outpaced the appropriation and the reserve that we had for CVO programs. And so we communicated as during that fiscal year that there would be the possibility that we would have to prorate CVO reimbursements. CVO operates a little bit differently from our other financial aid programs in that it is a statutory requirement for the public institutions to remit tuition and fees, and for the private institutions to give up to a $5,000 award. And then we have a fund here at the commission that allows us to reimburse the institution for those fee remissions. So we communicated during fiscal year 24 that we would potentially have to prorate those reimbursements if we were not able to have enough funds to cover them all. What actually ended up happening is at the end of fiscal year 24, we were able to do a transfer out of another financial aid program that we have to cover the difference and make all public and private institutions whole for fiscal year 24. We then communicated that for fiscal year 25, we were expecting the demand would outpace the appropriation again. And so ahead of 24-25, we communicated to every institution, both public and private, what we expected your prorated amount would be. We did a check-in in December to be able to make adjustments for the spring semester in case any institution was outpacing what we projected or underpacing what we projected. And then we did a settle up again at the end of the year, which you can see as the first bullet point here. So our commitment was whatever the share of the institution's sort of part of the CVO pie was, that we would prorate accordingly so that the funds that we had available were distributed accordingly. So we just finished up that process and we ended the fiscal year with $0 left in the fund. So that means we spent all of the appropriation and any remaining carry forward that we had. During the 2025 legislative session, we sought multiple solutions to being able to make the institutions whole. We did ask for an increase to the CVO appropriation. through the legislative session. And we also sought potential solutions with the state budget agency through the state agency contingency fund, as well as the ability to transfer from other funds. And unfortunately, we're not successful in any of those attempts. So the appropriation remained flat for the next biennium. We do not have funds that we have enough dollars to transfer out of or that we have approval to transfer out of to cover the difference again for fiscal year 25. And we were not approved for funds from the state agency contingency fund. The perspective that has been shared with us is that code requires the institutions to remit these tuition and fees, and for us to be able to reimburse the institutions with the funds that we have available. So we have just wrapped up fiscal year 25, and we have used what has occurred in fiscal year 25 and what the growth was for individual institutions between fiscal year 24 and 25 to make projections for fiscal year 26. Following this webinar, so that we can share this information with you, your individual institutions will receive what we expect your prorated amount to be for fiscal year 26, like we did last summer. And then we will check in again at the end of December, and then we will settle up again in June. The one thing that I really want to call out on this slide is, as we were working through implementing CVO this past year, we received several questions that we have addressed. One is, are the institutions required to still remit tuition and fees at the public institutions and to give the up to $5,000 awarded to private institutions? And the answer is yes. We have received legal guidance on interpreting the code, and that guidance has said that as code is written, that it is a requirement of the institutions to remit these fees. What that also means is there's no opt-in, opt-out process for CVO. Code requires that of the public and private institutions, and it will be updated so that it is on everyone's PPA when we send out those new PPAs this fall. So it is a requirement. The second question was about prorating the funds. We received, I guess I should say, second set of questions. So we've also received some guidance about that as well. The state budget agency has typically had agencies do two things when there are not enough funds in our account to be able to fully reimburse whatever entity we're supposed to reimburse at the state. One of those is to do a first come, first serve, and the other is to prorate. We have selected the option to prorate because we believe that to be the most equitable option across all of the institution types. Whereas if we went with the first come, first serve, more of the CVO funding would go to the institutions who get their claims into Scholar Track early than those who get their claims in later in the semester. So we have opted for the prorate option. The other thing that we sought clarification on was the wording for CVO for state educational institutions, the public ones, is different than the wording for the private institutions in code. And after seeking legal counsel, we have been told that the state is actually required, per how code is written now, to fully reimburse the private institutions. So that is a change to what we have communicated to you before. So we wanted to share this information here today in the webinar before we send your prorated amounts for fiscal year 26, because it will make your prorated amounts for the public institutions look slightly different accordingly. And for the private institutions, you'll note that we are intending to be able to fully reimburse you for the upcoming fiscal year. So we have done two things. Out of the fiscal year 26 appropriation, we have made the private institutions whole for fiscal year 25. That amounted to a little more than $56,000 across all of the private institutions. So it's not a large sum of money that is coming out of the fiscal year 26 appropriation, but we do want to be transparent that we have gone back to fiscal year 25 and finished paying out the claims for the private institutions. We have then adjusted the prorated amounts accordingly for fiscal year 26. So when private institutions receive their prorated amount, it will be what we assume that you are going to spend based on what has happened the last 2 years. And you'll see that that equals the amount that you have been allotted. And then public institutions have been prorated down accordingly based on their spending over the last 2 years and our need to make the private institutions whole. So we just want to be transparent about that. I wanted to let you know also on here that ahead of this webinar yesterday, we did share that information with public university presidents. We also shared that information with Dr. King at the Independent Colleges of Indiana. And it's my understanding that she has sent that out to the private institution presidents. And then we also shared it with the government relations colleagues that we have, both for the Independent Colleges of Indiana and the public institutions. And then we will follow up with specific emails pertaining to CVO to whoever is the financial aid administrator in ScholarTrack for your campus to share your specific amount for fiscal year 26. And those emails will come this week. I've already mentioned that we will again conduct a mid-year check-in. And so you'll see at the end of this presentation that we're going to have some deadlines to submit your CVO claims, much like we did last year, so that we can conduct that mid-year check and adjust if we need to for spring. What we're trying to avoid through that process is that we get to the end of the year and we have to make lots of adjustments for individual campuses. So we're going to give you what we believe your appropriation portion to be for the fiscal year up front. If we see that anything is underpacing or outpacing in December, we'll adjust for spring. And then hopefully that will allow for minimal, if not no settle up at the end of June, where we would have to adjust to make sure that sort of the piece of the pie is distributed accordingly across the institutions.
Questions?
Let's see. Okay, we have to confirm private colleges will be made whole for 24-25 academic year for the CVO remittance. That is correct. We have pulled the remaining claims for the private institutions and processed those. And we will be working to update ScholarTrack so that you can see those claims as paid rather than the not paid status. And so those of you who are at private institutions, you will see those funds come through to make you whole for fiscal year 25, and you can expect to be made whole for fiscal year 26 and 27. The next one, at a public institution for CVO, the institutional match does not exceed the 5,000 threshold per award year. Please confirm. At a public institution, the code says that you must remit full tuition and fees. And so whatever tuition and fees are at your institution, for CVO students, you would remit those full fees. In a year where we had enough funding to fully reimburse you, we would reimburse you for that full amount. But in a time where we are prorating, we're letting you know how much we'll reimburse, and there will be certain students who are marked as paid and reimbursed in ScholarTrack, and certain students who are marked as not paid. Like last year, we did ask institutions to insert all of their claims into ScholarTrack, regardless of whether we are reimbursing you for them. So we will have you do the same for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. The reason why we're asking to do that is so that if there becomes funds available that we can contribute to CVO, we can immediately start processing those claims, but also it gives us the data that we need to continue to advocate in the next budget session. We will be working on proposals for the 2027 budget session to address the funding for CVO, and having all of your claims in ScholarTrack will help us be able to do that. Danielle, your question about the state financial aid manual, I'm going to wait until the end, just so that we sort of stay on topic, but I see it and I will come back to it. Let's see. The publics are responsible for making up the difference between the prorated amount and tuition fees. That is correct. So until we are in a state where we have enough funding to fully reimburse you again, you must still continue to remit full tuition and fees, and whatever we are unable to reimburse you for, the institution would have to cover. We did, as we were implementing this past year, have several institutions who told students that they could not receive their CVO award because the commission was out of money. That is incorrect. There is no ability for an institution, either public or private, to be able to tell a student that they can't receive their CVO funding, because it is a requirement by code, and we have received legal counsel certification that it is required in code for the publics to remit the tuition and fees for the students, and for the private institutions to do the up to $5,000 award per the instructions that are in code. That's what I see in the chat. I see some things popping up in Q&A, so let me pop over there real quick. Okay, we have a question about, do we know why CVO expenditures are increasing so significantly and what is the driver? There, and having conversations with the ISFA Government Relations Committee, in having conversations with campuses who were applying through our Collegiate Purple Star initiative, and having conversations with presidents and in some cases chief financial officers, and then in also having conversations with those of you who have like military success offices on your campuses, as well as with the Indiana Department of Veteran Affairs. We believe that there are a few things that are contributing to increased costs in CVO. One of them is an admission by many of the campuses that as a result of bringing on military and veteran affiliated offices, or hiring dedicated staff to support that, that the campuses have just done a better job of identifying who these students are, and encouraging them to complete the application to be able to receive the CVO funds. We have seen particular growth in certain institutions, and have had conversations with them, and have recognized that there are just better tools and processes to identify students now. What we've heard from our colleagues at IDVA is that part of this is just a natural sort of historical timeline kind of population growth, where if you think about sort of the age of veterans, and what has happened in recent history, with different things that they may have been involved in, they may be reaching the age that they have children who are now eligible, same for public safety officers, but predominantly those who are veterans and military affiliated, that they're reaching the age where they have children, and that those children are of age to be able to go to college and to receive those awards. One of the conversations that we have had recently and are going to have ongoing after you submit your claims for this fall, is the IDVA is currently wrapping up a study of what population growth may look like over the next few years for the different programs that they do, and they are going to share that information with us so that we can see what the population growth may be, that would impact CVO as well. So those have been the two predominant things from our conversations with a variety of stakeholders. Here. Has there been any discussion as to having a deadline for the CVO awards and or the possibility of not retroactively paying students?
Yes.
I'm not sure about the second part. So a couple things. This past year, as I mentioned, we set deadlines for both the fall and spring semester to enter CVO claims. We're going to do that again this year. You'll see that on the last slide of this presentation. Again, that helps us sort of make sure that we're settling up appropriately with your campuses within the funds that we have available, and also allows us to be able to project accordingly as well. What we did communicate last year for the first time ever is that we would do a June 30th cutoff for CVO. So the state financial aid team has always had a 365-day window where you can sort of settle up on claims for the previous year. And because we were going to have to live within the appropriation, we stated that we were going to cut off at June 30th. The only exception to that is that we have now made the private institutions whole because we were told that the legal interpretation of code is that we need to do that. Now, what I will say, I think Angel maybe has a note about this here later in the slide as well, is what we have seen some institutions do is start re-entering their fiscal year 25 claims that were marked as not paid now that we are in fiscal year 26. And so there are two things that I need you to know about that. One is if your institution continues to enter fiscal year 25 claims and you want us to pay those out, they're going to come out of your fiscal year 26 prorated amount. So whether that prorated amount goes to fiscal year 25 or fiscal year 26 doesn't really matter to us as long as you are within that 365-day window, but you're only getting that chunk of money. And so what we are going to ask from your institution is that you provide us in writing that that is what you want to have happen, because we don't want to make any assumptions, especially if lots of folks across your campus may be entering claims into ScholarTrack. We want to make sure that we touch base with whoever the financial aid administrator admin is in ScholarTrack, that we have in writing that you want us to still process fiscal year 25 claims on your fiscal year 26 prorated amount. If you do not want to do that, anything that was not reimbursed for fiscal year 25 has been marked as not paid in the system, and you can just leave that as is, and then you can begin to enter your fiscal year 26 claims based on the timeline that we provide. So Joanna, I hope that that answered your question. If it did not, feel free to put additional clarification in the chat.
I do want to add something to that, which this will be in the financial aid manual. In order for the student to receive their CBO, the payment from our office, that CBO application must be submitted in ScholarTrack within the academic year. So just to kind of expand a little bit upon a question that was asked, we've had students who will go the entire academic year, not submit the CBO application. They'll submit it for the next school year, and we have allowed you all to insert those claims from the prior academic year and for the current academic year. If the student has not submitted that application in ScholarTrack within that same academic year, we will not allow you all to go ahead and insert the claim. I think that protects us. It also protects you all, but it also reminds the student that there's deadlines for things and that they're also accountable for not submitting things within good timing. So although that might not be a large population of the students that we interact with, I do think that it is a great policy that we're putting in place so we don't have the issue of retroactively paying students for things that they hadn't submitted the application. Now, obviously, there's exceptions if the application is on hold by IDVA or things of that nature, right? Things that are out of the student's control. But if the student just simply didn't file their FAFSA or submit the application for 24-25, and then for 25-26 academic year, they go ahead and file the 24-25 FAFSA and the application for CBO, ScholarTrack is going to create that award, but we're no longer going to allow you to insert that claim for the prior year if the application wasn't submitted within that same window.
Speaking of that, Joanna clarified her question. So her original question was, has there been any discussion as to having a deadline for the CBO awards and or the possibility of not retroactively paying students? This follow-up is, I meant the deadline for students to submit their FAFSAs and get paid.
Yeah, so it needs to be done within the academic year. There still isn't a FAFSA deadline for CBO, at least not at this moment. But as of now, the application and their FAFSA must be submitted within the academic year in order for the student to be able to utilize that. Again, if policy change or, we want to change that, that is up to our discretion, and we will make sure that you all are aware and that the information is in the financial aid manual.
Okay, I think we're caught up on questions.
Okay,
our next topic is the Frank-O'Bannon grant. We have had lots of discussions, both through webinars and emails, about Frank-O'Bannon in the last year. The 25-26 schedule was released earlier this year, and we are still operating off of the 25-26 schedule that was released, but we do have some new information to share with you as a result of the legislative session. So HEA 1001, specifically sections 242 and 243, made a change to the type of funds, I should say, as there's two funds that feed into Frank-O'Bannon, the type of funds that they are. So historically, the two funds that feed into Frank-O'Bannon have been non-reverting, and HEA 1001 this year did change them to reverting funds. So that means at the end of the fiscal year, any funding that is left over in the Frank-O'Bannon grant reverts back to the general fund at the state. What it also did was a one-time reversion of all of our reserves for Frank-O'Bannon. So little go back in time history for those who maybe don't know everything about this, or to refresh those of you who have been part of these conversations. In 2023, we sought for permission to be able to responsibly spend down the reserves that we had in Frank-O'Bannon. We had built up reserves because of some changes that had happened previously during the recession, as well as a declining college going rate and a variety of other factors. And we proposed to the state budget committee to be able to create schedules of awards that would allow us to appropriately spend down those reserves and then commit to living within the appropriation as is required of us by code once we spent down those reserves. And so we put out a new schedule for 23-24 that would allow us to be able to do that. What we did not expect after receiving approval to be able to spend down those reserves was what happened with the 24-25 FAFSA, and both related to the delays of receiving information from the federal government on ICERs for that year, and timing of needing to get information to the institutions. In consultation with the financial aid community, we made a decision to hold the 24-25 schedule the same, knowing that we would have to alter the schedule once we had a better sense of what was going on with the FAFSA. And so the 25-26 schedule is that altered schedule now that we have been able to do analysis on the information that we received as a result of the new FAFSA. That 25-26 schedule of awards was approved before the end of the session when we got this change in HEA 1001. So while we have released the 25-26 schedule of awards to you, and we are telling you to award based off that, we transparently need to tell you that there is the possibility that we would have to change the 25-26 schedule of awards mid-year. We are not anticipating having to do that at this time, but once we receive claim data in the fall, if we were to believe based on the data that we're receiving that we are going to outpace the appropriation, there is no more reserve for Franco-Bannon, and thus we would have to make an adjustment. The way that we would do that is we would have you all award the fall semester award based on the 25-26 schedule, and then we would adjust spring semester awards to be able to live within the appropriation. So unlike where you typically see the same award amounts for fall and spring, except in certain cases, you would see a different amount for spring 2026. Our financial aid team and our business intelligence team are regularly monitoring what we project our spend to be based on FAFSA filing. And currently we are projecting that we will live within the appropriation, will not have to make that change, but we do want to be transparent that that change is possible. We essentially, as a result of the reserves being reverted back and having to actually live within the appropriation now, which has always been required by code, we basically have two options. We can either wait to make that schedule based on claims information, and your students would receive their Franco-Bannon grant awards after the school year has started so that we can use actual data to be able to build that schedule. Or we can use the data that we have available based on historical FAFSA filing, what we see in the trends based on the switch from EFC to SAI, the percentage of students who are typically eligible for Franco-Bannon and their FAFSA filing timelines, and all sorts of data points that we use to be able to project and to be able to make a projected schedule that we get approved by the state budget committee early so that you can release financial aid awards, particularly to new students who may be making enrollment decisions, and just know that we might have to make adjustments. We have no choice for 25-26 because we have already approved the schedule of awards, but those would be our two options moving forward. For those who are not aware of the approval process, the commission puts together a proposed schedule of awards. That schedule is voted on by our board at one of our commission meetings, and then it must go before the state budget committee. And so that is sort of the process that we will go through for future ones. You will also see at the end of this presentation, in addition to us asking for claims for CVO by a specific deadline, we're also going to ask for claims for Franco-Bannon by a specific deadline. That is so that we can have the data that we need to be able to determine if we're going to need to adjust for spring 2026 in the current academic year, but also for us to be able to start building out what will be the 26-27 schedule of awards so that we can get that approved as early as possible. That deadline is going to be in October, which is similar to what we did last year, and based on consultation with the financial aid community about the best possible date where we have most claims in, except for those who have second 8-week courses and some alternate term schedules. We will then very quickly turn that data around to be able to build a proposed schedule. That schedule for 26-27 will be projected to go in front of the commission at our November meeting. And then we would plan to go before the state budget committee in December so that you all could have that information going into the spring 2026 school year to plan for packaging and releasing financial aid awards, not only for new students who are making enrollment decisions, but for your continuing students as well. So that's the plan as it stands for now. We have a question here that says, will Franco-Bannon be stackable with NGSG? It is not. The law that we went over that expanded that eligibility specifically denoted the 21st Century Scholars Program. It did not denote the Franco-Bannon grant. Thanks, Caitlin, for helping answer that. And then will we give quarter schools different dates? Yes, you will see that we our broad communications will give a deadline for both CVO and FOB broadly for the majority, if not all, claims for your institutions to be able to be in. But for those of you who are on alternate term schedules, Angel's team will communicate with you directly on when it would be best to get that information in so that we can use that as much as possible in our projections. So for schools that award full year, would it be a good choice to award term one only for now? I will let your institution decide on your processes for how you want to communicate with students. On our award letters that go out in ScholarTrack, I think there's like 7 lines on that award letter that basically address the fact that awards can change. So we try via the award letters and in ScholarTrack to communicate abundantly to students that their awards could change. We've recommended that institutions do the same on their financial aid award letters, that specific awards are subject to change, Franco-Bannon being one of those. So I'll let you decide if you just want to continue to communicate that those awards are subject to change, or if you would rather just award the fall term and wait for us to confirm that we're going to be able to award the spring term at the same rate. We, after the priority, once you submit your claims, will be to determine if we need to make a change to the 25-26 schedule of awards. And then as soon as we've made that decision, we'll start working on the 26-27 schedule of awards. And so we would be able to let you know mid-fall semester if we're anticipating a change for spring. I think that's all the questions in the chat. Let me go over here to Q&A. Okay, the question that's over here is just what's the timeline for us letting you know if we would need to make spring adjustments. As I mentioned, as soon as the majority of claims are entered into ScholarTrack by the October deadline that we're going to give you, priority number 1 would be making that decision and communicating that to institutions and to students, and then we'll work on the 26-27 schedule of awards. So you can expect mid to late October once we're able to analyze that data.
So just to add just some details to what Michelle pretty much just explained to you all. Again, this is to protect us, but it's also to protect you all as we are managing each appropriation, but also making you aware of where we stand with funds, right? You all need to be made aware ahead of time, but we need great partnership in order for that to take place. So in order for us to continue to properly manage each appropriation, we have to have the claims submitted in ScholarTrack in a timely manner from each institution. Obviously, we know that there's institutions who have continuous enrollments or second 8-week courses. So the times that you claim could be a little different than some of our traditional fall, spring, summer institutions. However, we are asking that you all insert your claims in a timely manner. As soon as you know, or once the census date has passed, we really need your partnership in getting these claims in on time. So that way we can properly manage and budget our appropriations. So CVO and Franco-Bannon claims for fall 25, as Michelle stated, for the fall 25 term, they need to be entered in ScholarTrack no later than October 17th. If not all, majority of them need to be entered in. Again, for our schools that have the continuous rolling terms, we'll communicate different deadlines with you all, but we're asking by October 17th to have those claims entered in. For a CVO, at that point, we will give you an update of what we have processed and are paid for you in ScholarTrack as it relates to your prorated dollars, and we'll also let you know your balance. That at that time, that will factor in the claims and the refunds that you possibly have entered. And also, as Michelle stated, we'll give you the option to let us know if you want us to pay out the CVO claims from fiscal year 25 from your fiscal year 26 prorated dollars. However, by October 17th will be a great timeline for us to be able to take a look at the CVO dollars, but then also for us to look at our Franco-Bannon grant fund to see what's remaining there for us to give you all an update on what to expect for spring 26. For fall 25 claims for all other awards, They need to be entered into ScholarTrack by December 1 of 2025. Again, this allows us to do budgeting and projections for the remainder of the fiscal year. If there's opportunity, which I'm not stating that it is, however, if there is opportunity for us to transfer funds from one appropriation to the other to help meet demand, this deadline is also giving us the opportunity to do that as well. And then for spring 26, all claims need to be entered in by June 12th. This date could change depending on what our finance team tells us based on what the comptroller is telling them. So as of now, we're saying by June 12th. Again, that date is subject to change just depending on what takes place from our finance team. And then all refunds for fiscal year 26 should also be entered in by that date as well. For those of you who are not aware of the process, anytime you insert a refund for one award and then you're inserting claims for that same award, ScholarTrack is just giving you that difference, right? So if you're refunding $10,000, but then you're inserting a claim for claims that total up to $30,000, that difference, that $10,000 that's refunding, that's going to be the change there, right? So it isn't anything physical that you all need to do for us to make that change. There aren't funds that you are going to receive back. We're just deducting, right? We're just making that difference based on your claims and your refunds. We've had some questions on what takes place when the refunds are entered in the ScholarTrack. Again, as you're entering refunds and claims, ScholarTrack is just calculating the difference with what we owe and what you're giving us back. If that makes sense.
Yeah, a couple things I'll say about that. The reason why she says that those June dates are subject to change is the state goes through a fiscal year closeout period. I'm sure that your campuses have something similar where there's a period of time where systems are locked down and we can't process things. And so we try to get as much in before that closeout period starts. And then we basically go on pause. And then once the new fiscal year starts and they tell us that we can reopen systems again, we start processing things again. So this June 12th date is based off this year. I believe it was June 13th. So we're just picking the same day, and we'll obviously let you know as we get closer to that. There is a question in the chat that says, sometimes we do not receive federal tuition aid for the spring semester until after the June 12th deadline. Is this a problem or is it fine to do a refund? You can certainly still go in and continue to enter those. We just don't want people all waiting until after that deadline if there's others that you can already be processing. If that is going to significantly affect your institution, anytime that something's going to significantly impact your institution, either inserting claims or refunds, if you could let Angel know, that's great. Because otherwise we just run data and maybe an institution looks off and we're not sure why. And so if you could proactively let us know if something's going to prevent you from meeting a deadline or for a specific population of students, that just prevents us from trying to track down and see what's going on. What we want to avoid is this year we communicated a June 13th deadline ahead of closeout, and then a whole bunch of refunds came in June 30th. We obviously couldn't process those until the next fiscal year. And that's fine for a day-to-day operations perspective, but the challenge that we have is the timeline for submitting things like budget requests and the timeline for submitting things that are based off projections are not aligned with that fiscal year closeout period. And so the earlier that we can get information, the better for us to be able to do the other things that we need to do to advocate for funding for your campuses and for your students. Real quick, to go back to Franco-Bannon, you're welcome, Helen. The other thing I failed to mention for this first bullet point here is while all of the reserves were reverted back at the end of fiscal year 25, and the funds have changed to reverting funds, we did retain the ability to transfer Franco-Bannon funds. And so assuming that we had leftover funding at the end of the year, for example, the ability to transfer it into the 21st Century Scholar Funds and into the Adult Student Grant Funds. And so depending on what the demand looks like for those programs, especially in light of auto enrollment for 21st Century Scholars, increased demand on the Workforce Ready Grant, which is in the same fund as Adult Student Grant, based on sort of the expansion of access to that program now. We do have the ability to transfer Franco-Bannon funds rather than reverting them into those two programs. And so just wanted to be transparent that we have still retained that opportunity moving forward. So, With that, we are near the end of our PowerPoint. I don't see any questions in the chat or Q&A right now, but we do have plenty of time to still take them. So if you're on here and have questions that you haven't asked and want us to go back to any of these topics or address others, Angel has all of our contact information here. And as you're aware, Angel does a webinar series all throughout the year. And then trainings on very specific topics. So she mentioned the training that will be forthcoming about transition to teach. We'll have some other trainings coming up as well. So this is not the only time that you'll hear from us for the year. And then we do send out emails. I do want to be transparent while we've got a captive audience again. We switched email platforms for our mass emails. We used to be on a system called GovDelivery, and now we're on a Salesforce-backed platform. And we have received, not so much recently, but in the switch to that platform, that our emails that go out to the college financial aid community may be landing in your filters or junk mail or whatever your email looks like on your campus. So if you could mark one of those as safe, that would make sure that they continue to get through to you. I think that we've resolved most concerns, but just want to make sure that you're monitoring junk mail and whatever filters that you may have on your campus so that you're not missing our messages. And we have what specific domains you should safe list. So when Angel sends out information with the recording and PowerPoint for this, we can make sure that we remind you what domains to safe list in your email.
Yep. A couple of things I do want to add before we answer questions in the chat or QA if there are any there. A couple updates. One, the recalculation issue with 21st. If you have processed,
that's one of the questions.
Absolutely. If you have processed state financial aid at any period over the past maybe 3 years, you are aware that we have had this recalculation issue every year, and I'm just being completely transparent. Every year, we believe that we have the issue resolved. We work with our IT team, our IT vendor, and they tell us the issue is resolved. We have a fix in the system. Every year, we say, okay, we're going to address this differently with the hopes of not having the slowness with recalculation. And each year, a different issue with that same process that we thought we fixed the prior year now comes back to life. So again, that was the issue this year. However, we do believe that there will be a long-term fix this time around. But prior to the webinar, we did hear from our IT vendor that there was a fix that was deployed into our production site. So you all should be able to request your information files and see additional 21st Century Scholar students there. I do have this request that as you are submitting the request for your information files, please do not do more than a year at a time. What that does to ScholarTrack is it slows it down. And if you all have experienced the issue with your request being stuck in queue, the result is because we may have had an institution and or multiple institutions who are requesting files for 2 to 3 academic years at a time. I know that may be extremely beneficial for your processes, but I will say at least at the start of the fall semester now, as you're requesting these files to request one academic year at a time, once we get through August, you should be perfectly fine with requesting additional academic years for that same request. I'm not saying that you can't put in multiple requests at a time, and be clear. You can put in multiple requests at a time, but as you are inserting that one request, let's not do 23, 24, 25 all at one time, but you can request those years separately. Mm-hmm. You're still okay to request the multiple award types at a time. That's perfectly fine. It's just that ScholarTrack does slow down a little bit once we're requesting additional years for one large file. To answer the question for the financial aid manual, I'm not exactly sure what was asked, but I'm pretty sure
you want to know one coming. Yep.
What is it going to be updated? So it's currently being edited. It hasn't been completed because we were waiting for legal guidance for CBO because we want to make sure that we put that information in there. In addition to that, we're still waiting on information to come from the Indiana National Guard's office as it relates to the changes to the National Guard Supplemental Grant for certificate programs and apprenticeships. So just the editing for that can take a lot of time. It takes time for approval from our communications team to review that and make sure that it's all formatted properly. But it is currently being edited, and we will let you all know when that is complete. Hoping to have it done over the next couple of months at the latest, but it is currently being edited now.
And that will have all the updates to the teaching scholarships and other things that we have discussed today that are legislative changes as well.
Yeah. And then for the listserv, so we did have a link for a listserv for anyone who was interested in receiving updates about state financial aid. What we saw with that was high school counselors and other high school admin were subscribing to the listserv for state financial aid. And so they were getting a bunch of emails about financial aid. Then we were receiving a bunch of emails and questions about if it pertained to them. So we just removed that link. If you or someone at your institution would like to be on the listserv for college financial aid updates, just send that request to College FA and we'll make sure that that individual or individuals are added to the future communications.
Yeah. We have a question about how the state financial aid manual is distributed to the institutions.
So we'll just share the link. It's all online. You can download it. If you want to, or you can look at it digitally, but once it's updated, we'll go ahead and share the link. But it is currently on the CHE website under the State Financial Aid Administrators tab.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll share logistically as we are awaiting to see if there's any other questions is each of your campuses should have a financial aid admin and scholar track. That individual is responsible for ensuring that anybody else who has financial aid access and scholar track should have that access. So if you have had staff changes in recent months or are anticipating staff changes in the coming months, please just make sure that your teams are working together to update who has access in Scholar Track so that we are keeping that as up to date as possible.
If you all have a request for a one-on-one training for your institution, maybe you've had staff changes, and maybe just looking at the webinar recording or looking at the PowerPoints isn't working for you, that is perfectly fine. You all can notify us and Kaylin or I will set up a one-on-one training. We've done it in the past. We have no problem with setting aside time to do the training with your institution, again, whether it's new staff or you need a refresher. By all means, you can email us and we can set up some time to go over Scholar Track with you specifically.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions that we haven't addressed. Just to reiterate, this has been recorded, and as soon as it downloads or processes and downloads, we will be able to share a link to that recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint. Everyone who registered for the webinar will get a copy of that, and you're obviously welcome to share that with others who were unable to attend. And then you will this week receive an email from Angel regarding your CVO prorated amount if you're a public campus, and what we expect your spending to be if you're a private campus. So watch for that email to come through. And then as we near the start of the semester, you'll receive communications about the program participation agreements and your audits, upcoming webinars and training opportunities for specific topics. And if there is any specific topic that you're ever interested, you're certainly welcome to send that to our team. You're also welcome to share that with ISFA, who frequently hosts webinars in conjunction with us as well, or to consider for topics for their conferences and other events as well. So let us know how we can be helpful. So we'll hang on for just a couple minutes. I see some people are starting to drop off. It looks like chat and Q&A has all been answered. So we'll hang on just for a couple more in case people have questions, but otherwise you're welcome to sign off and we appreciate your attendance.
Thank you all so much for joining today.
I just saw someone raise their hand. I don't think we have the ability to hear you. I believe your mics and your cameras are automatically muted. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat or Q&A that you can see at the top of the screen, and we would be happy to answer that. Jennifer, I see, I'm going to answer this hoping you're still on here, and so it's recorded, but we'll also make sure we reach out. If you would like a one-on-one training, you are welcome to reach out to the College Financial Aid email. Mine and Angel's emails are also at the end of this slide along with that one. Angel's probably a better contact than me directly, just because She is more accessible day to day, but that college FA at che.in.gov is usually the best place to send those requests. Okay, I'm not seeing any other. Oh. For unpaid CBO for spring 2025 at private schools, we will be made whole, but the budget will come from the fiscal year 26 budget. Is that correct? Yes. Because we had already distributed all of the fiscal year 25 funds and had closed out fiscal year 25 for the agency and for the state, out of the fiscal year 26 appropriation, we have made private institutions whole first for fiscal year 25, and then we have calculated what we believe the private institutions will spend and plan to make them whole for the rest of fiscal year 26, and then have prorated the public institutions accordingly based on that.
And in ScholarTrack now, you should see those once not paid claims showing as processed because they were processed on Friday. So obviously it still take a couple weeks before that shows as paid, but they have been processed.
You're welcome. We'll maybe just a couple minutes here till 12:15. I still see about 30 folks on here. Some of you may have just stepped away from your computers, but on the off chance anyone's got a last minute question, we'll wait a couple minutes and then we'll close down.
Yep.
And I'm guessing before we end, I should stop recording.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and click that.